The Binding of Isaac, a simple but effective love letter to roguelike games, was an unexpected success for Edmund Mcmillen. It received an overwhelmingly positive reception and kept fans hooked in with its replayable structure and compelling, mysterious narrative. Yet, its first version never came to the gigantic home console market. In fact, when the idea of console ports was suggested to Mcmillen, he decided that The Binding of Isaac would be better suited to a wholesale remake. The result was The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, which took the original's core mechanics and atmosphere while expanding significantly on every area of gameplay. By the time that production began on Rebirth, some behind-the-scenes issues had left the game in need of a new composer. Previously, Danny Baranowsky had composed fantastic music for The Binding of Isaac, and was already well loved by fans. If you haven't heard the previous episode of this podcast, you can hear Danny discuss his work in a dedicated edition. But, for Rebirth, it was a simple fact that the then vacant role would need to be filled. Having already collaborated with Edmund Mcmillen, RIDICULON were the clear choice to step up to the plate. A composing duo consisting of John Evans
How you doing?
and Matthias Bossi,
Can you hear us?
their music has since been heard in other Mcmillen projects, including The End Is Nigh and Super Meat Boy, both of which have upcoming episodes in this series too. For The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, RIDICULON provided a deeply visceral soundtrack that sounds scarily like the grisly locations you visit, but grows heavier and more imposing as you fall deeper down its rabbit hole. I'm Lee Tyrrell, and this is the Sound Test, where I look in depth into video game audio and music, along with the very people who crafted it. In this episode, I'm joined by both John and Matthias, who together form RIDICULON, to get their side of the Binding of Isaac story. And since Danny Baranowsky is possibly one of the hardest acts to follow in the VGM world, it's natural to wonder how much this affected RIDICULON. To what degree did the duo let Danny's soundtrack inform them?
Zero Danny in us, and zero us in Danny. Danny's a great musician. He's his own thing. I never played The Binding of Isaac before we were called to do the job. So, it was a clean slate.
And I think that so many people, love Danny B's soundtrack, and he's made a huge impact. And people love that music, and I think that for us, it was intentional and expressly, encouraged that we do something completely different rather than trying to make a Danny B 2.0 soundtrack. We were encouraged to do something different and make a clean break from that, and so that's what we did.
Danny and RIDICULON are entirely separate entities, and though some fans try hard, there's little point comparing the two. There's more than one thing you can hit a nail on the head with, and both soundtracks, at least in my opinion, do just that. RIDICULON were an inspired choice for the role, as Danny was too, but what gave Edmund Mcmillen the intuition that they were the right people this time around?
Well, the long dormant and perhaps to be resuscitated Mugenics was our first game with Edmund. We started working on Mugenics with Ed in 2011, and it may or may not be picked up again.
Mugenics is essentially vaporware, which means that it's had some screenshots and concepts shown, but hasn't appeared on the market despite significant time passing. Mcmillen has flirted with completing Mugenics several times, but numerous projects over the years have seen it repeatedly shelved, though development is said to have started again as of 2018. Even further back than Mugenics, Digging deeper into the relationship between Mcmillen and Ridiculon reveals an interesting nugget of fate.
The first thing we ever did together, before John and I were Ridiculon, I did the voiceover for the original Binding of Isaac in John's studio before John and I were actually officially working together.
Isaac and his mother lived alone in a small house on a hill. Isaac kept to himself, drawing pictures and playing with his toys as his mom watched Christian broadcasts on the television.
So that was the first time, and I should say, go back even further. Ed was a fan of my band. He used to come out and see my wife and I play on stage together, and then he got in touch for this voiceover, and then John and I, within a year of each other, moved back to the East Coast, and then Mugenics fell in our lap, and we've been working with Ed ever since on any number of his odd projects. So the Isaac came along. We started working on it in October or November of 2013, and then Great Guns as of 2014. Then it came out in the summer of 2014.
For the uninitiated, who exactly is Edmund Mcmillen? A game designer whose work started on the creative wellspring of Newgrounds, Mcmillen has etched out his own Flash-inspired style. Along with Super Meat Boy, The End Is Nigh, Gish, and reams of others, he's the main force behind the Binding of Isaac in all of its forms. Rebirth soundtrack was firmly in the hands of Ridiculon, but it all came filtered through Mcmillen's vision.
Edmund is very picky and very specific about what he wants. He develops all his games in uber secret. I go and visit him about once a year, and he kind of lets me into his secret cave, and I see a couple of cool levels, and I'm able to just kind of check a few things out. But mostly he'll communicate with us, send along his favorite music, what he's been listening to, some poetry, if you will, regarding a certain level or a certain boss or a certain feeling that he's trying to get to in any given level.
Without much face-to-face contact, John and Matthias were left to interpret emails from Mcmillen. Sent to help guide Ridiculon down the right path, instead of a more official brief, many of these emails were often fascinatingly cryptic. So how exactly did Mcmillen convey his direction, and what was his thought process?
It's really specific, and it's really odd, and it really gets you thinking. You know, he'll say, I really need this sound of worms and dirt and decay and dripping walls. He has that in his mind, and perhaps he's not able to articulate it in musical terms, but he knows what it sounds like. And sometimes we get it right off the bat, and sometimes it's like 8 or 9 or 10 revisions before we get to that thing. But he knows what he wants. And so when you hear the flooded caves or the womb, you know, he'll say, like, I need this to sound like bloody meat, or I really need this to be like crumbling rocks and dirt. So he's talking in poetry about a feeling or a panic, or how, you know, he's not necessarily saying like, hey, you know, make this sound like Trent Reznor, or make this sound like Swans, or like Glenn Branca, you know, just I want to feel like a scared kid in a basement, and here's the things that I'm touching and feeling, and I need your music to sound like that. And I can't exactly say what that means in terms of how fast or slow or what key you're in. I just need to live your music.
It has a lot to do with the adjectives that are sent to us, and we'll get little paragraphs and sentences about what's happening, in that section of the game, and it's like Matthias said earlier, it's mostly words, and then you might say, oh, this one has to ramp up intensity from the last one, or it should be a little bit lower, but intensity, just these vague terms, and then all those adjectives and phrases will inspire us, and we just try to internalize that and bring it out in a musical form.
We've been working with him now for 7 years, and it's a delicate dance between the music and the producer and the ultimate artist and designer of these worlds, but we have found our language and feel like we are starting to know his brain and what it is that drives it.
Mcmillen's emails were abstract, subjective, and though specific, a liberating approach for a creative project. His adjectives and references gave Ridiculon plenty of space to express, and that comes across in their music. Atmospheric and looming, many of their tracks share an organic sound that gorgeously shimmers beneath your in-game movements. How did Ridiculon achieve that sound with nothing but emails as a springboard?
As rhythm section players, I think John and I tend to build from the basement up. I mean, you kind of do that in real life, but I think, maybe some people have a lyric or a melody first. We tend to build from bass and drums and layer things. So then next up the line, you might have a rhythm guitar part and lots of chugs that are then doubled and tripled. And then next up, you might have like a very slow moving baritone guitar line, and then up and up and up. And then finally you build and you realize, like, okay, once we're up here at the melody, it's actually a very straightforward, simple, slow moving thing. A lot of those Isaac tracks are very vibey and almost ambient tracks. And they are that because we started so humbly from the bottom, just a rhythm section track. And by the time you get up to the top, it's just atmosphere sort of swirling around you and not necessarily a traditional melody,
Another thing that contributes to the vibe of Binding of Isaac Rebirth is improvisation. It's more common for games to feature a single composer or a number of different musicians working on their own. With Ridiculon being a duo, it's only natural that they bounce off one another. Teamwork is their greatest strength and the basis of the majority of their work.
We'd like to write with the spirit of improvisation and spontaneity. Discuss a tempo and a feeling, and look at Ed's email from the night before, and it'll talk about blood and worms and rocks, and we'll say, all right, this is 75 BPM of blood and worms and rocks, and we're aiming for a 2.5 minute piece. All right, so at this tempo, we have a 64 bar form. You're going to play bass, I'm going to play drums. We're going to go down there and we're just going to smash something, and we'll see if some little something we did can then inspire the next rung up.
We will get a certain feeling and then actually do it like live humans might, and then that becomes the song from there, and then everything is built on top of that. So I think that is something that's a little bit different about what we do from a lot of game music. Not that I can speak to everybody's process, but with the Isaac music, a lot of it, Matthias and I will we'll get in the studio and literally write it in real time, just improvise sections or entire songs, and just kind of try to encapsulate that feeling that Ed has given us with all his adjectives and statements, and go from there, rather than a lone person with their computer writing something and then working on it forever. We will just go for that spirit and spontaneity.
There are some exceptions, where one member of Ridiculon would bring something practically complete to the table. For example, a couple of the game's most iconic themes have very humble beginnings at Matthias's household piano.
I remember vividly sitting at home with my wife very pregnant and writing "You Died" and "The Calm" on the piano and bringing them in, and they were just done. And those are basically like solo piano pieces within the Isaac world. So, what John previously just spoke to is a lot of how we work.
But John and Matthias always shared duties on the game's wide cast of bosses. As the Binding of Isaac Rebirth tumbles further into its dark themes and characters, the music has to follow suit. Ridiculon still improvised, as is the magic behind their work, but forethought was important in constructing a musical arc around the game's bosses.
There's a lot of bosses in Isaac, and you have to plan out. There's the earlier bosses, and then there's, you get to the final boss, you need to have a ramp up in energy, and you either achieve that. We mostly try and do it in terms of a ramp up of tempo. I think in some of our games there's like a 50 or 60 BPM difference between an early boss and a later boss. And just keeping up with that at the end, if it so happens that you plan that out, if you have a 240 BPM boss, like, fuck yeah, that's full of panic, because John and I can barely keep up with playing metal at 240 beats per minute.
A basic boss fight, as they're labelled, is accompanied by Crusade, which is surprisingly restrained. By later in the game, a battle against Satan is, as you'd hope, a far heavier affair. It speaks to the overall progression of the game, and Ridiculon's music throbs with the same growth. Once dripping with nervous tension, their soundtrack results in a mounting, inescapable terror.
You go further and further, you descend into the ninth circle of hell. It's going to get hot and heavy and not fun. So you have to achieve that in your music as well. It gets more and more claustrophobic, more and more disorienting, more heavy. The pressure builds, man. We are descending down thousands of meters into the red, hot magma core of the earth.
Under those conditions, it can't be easy to improvise. As tempos increase and rhythms become more complex and challenging, improvisation becomes a much more difficult beast. John and Matthias made the very most of this, letting it bleed into the tracks themselves to great effect. Panic burns its way into the sound of boss battles as they progress, and Ridiculon cleverly captured it through their close understanding of one another.
We also set ourselves up with these little fun challenges within a writing of a boss piece. Like, there are some very obtuse 16 or 32 bar sections where we set out and it's like we're diving off a cliff. We're not giving you a one drop for like 32 bars. And John is just, I'm playing this ogre drum beat, and John is like playing over the bar line for like 32 bars, and that's enough to panic anyone. We have a few of those moments in the boss tracks where, I said, hey, John, in this section, I'm going to just play super straight ahead here. I'm just going to drive the bus, and you are going to try your best to absolutely derail me. You're going to start out, you're going to hit one, and then maybe 16 bars later, you're going to resolve. But within that murky time period, I want you to throw me off, or I want you to make the kids feel really upset in this section. And then go back and learn it and try and play it. We have a few of those moments.
Panic only intensifies for Rebirth's additional content, the expansions Afterbirth and Afterbirth Plus. Like Wrath of the Lamb for the first Binding of Isaac, these expansions fleshed out everything about the game, including music. They continued the soundtrack's progression too, largely leaving behind the spacious tracks that dominate Rebirth at first. The tracks are still absolutely within the universe of Isaac and reflect the titular character's traumatic journey. Was there anything different about Ridiculon's mindset when they composed for the game's expansions?
We're well versed in the language of Isaac and what it is that we have done, and I know some people think we went fully towards heavy metal at the end, but I feel it's all a natural extension of the foundation that we built at the beginning. I would say the process is very much the same. I mean, clearly, Afterbirth Plus, Afterbirth is heavy, man. I mean, it's really heavy. We went full metal, but I feel like if you can hear the tendrils of the bigger game that inspired it, for sure.
Ridiculon had big boots to fill when they took on the Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Fortunately, they chose to leave those boots be and wear their own, which opened a whole new musical window into the game. Isaac's travels are accentuated at every step by the duo's atmospheres, but his danger is given an adrenaline shot by grinding riffs and chugs. All inspired by a mere set of adjectives from Edmund Mcmillen, the music is pure Ridiculon, and a glorious fit for the addictive anguish of the Binding of Isaac Rebirth.
Listen, our motto, floor it and let your mind drift.
Safety third.
Safety third, Lee. Yeah, we no seatbelts, no helmets. All right, first is danger, utmost. Second is blood. Third is safety. Once we're bleeding, then we try and suture things up.
Thanks to both John and Matthias for speaking to me for the sound test, but thank you too for taking the time to listen. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please make sure to subscribe or follow on whatever platform you might be listening on. RIDICULON will be making another 2 appearances in this series, on editions covering Super Meat Boy and The End Is Nigh. There will be a new episode each week, with next week's taking a trip to Donkey Kong Country with 3 of its esteemed composers. I'll be going over the whole series from its Super Nintendo classics to the modern masterpiece Tropical Freeze, with David Wise, Evelyn Novakovic and Grant Kirkhope in his second Soundtest appearance. All our Patreon supporters can receive early access to this Kong extravaganza for a single $1. So head on over to patreon.com/_secret cave if you'd like to pledge your support and hear next week's episode right now. Of course, this doesn't apply if you're already a patron and hearing this episode in advance.